Hello, and thank you for tuning into this podcast with me. I'm Anthea Chilton, and I'm one of the Sector Learning and Development Leads at the Housing Ombudsman Service. And today I'm joined by two of my colleagues from the Insight and Development team, Sarah Patton and Sophie Taylor-Bratt. And we're going to be talking about our newly released follow-up report on Spotlight on Knowledge and Information Management on the record. We refer to knowledge and information management as KIM for short. So if you hear us mention KIM during this podcast, that's what we mean. And the follow-up report summarises our evaluation of the original Spotlight report, which was published back in May 2023. So Sarah and Sophie, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, hi Anthea. So I'm Sarah, an Insight and Systemic Manager, and I support the team in generating insight into the housing sector and associated complaints. So one of the things I do with that insight is to lead thematic Spotlight reports into the issues identified to promote learning in the sector. Sophie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Sophie. I'm an Insight and Systemic Officer, and one of my tasks is to conduct analysis on the data collected in our call for evidence.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah and Sophie. It's really nice to have you here. And to get us started, please could you give us a reminder of what we mean by knowledge and information management, or KIM?
Yeah, sure. So knowledge and information management, it's about how we create, store, use and share information. So the housing industry has historically talked about record keeping, but this only really refers to the storing aspect, and it doesn't really reflect either the scale of the challenge nor the extent of the opportunity if landlords get it right. So to try and keep it relatively simple and practical, I like to think about knowledge and information management as about the data gathered, the systems available, the way people use them, and the organisational approach and culture.
Great. So although record keeping forms part of knowledge and information management, it really does go a lot wider than that. So casting our minds back then to the original report, and I mentioned earlier this was released back in May 2023, there were 26 recommendations. Could you give us a quick overview of what those recommendations were?
Yes, certainly. So it might help if I split those recommendations up into the 5 key themes. So firstly, there was governance and culture, and we had 6 recommendations in this area. So this was all about the principle that successful KIM starts with understanding and appreciating the benefits to both the landlord and its residents. And this needs to be centrally led, so with senior leaders clear about the importance of KIM and also clear about the standards and expectations. So recommendations covered points such as define the oversight role of governance for knowledge and information management, and having a KIM strategy to include definitions of which data repository to use for which data sets. The second theme was key recording standards, and there was 4 recommendations in this. And the original Spotlight, we highlighted concerns with the ability of local authority landlords to respond to our FOI query. And we know that landlords also need to ensure that they create comprehensive data sets that allows them to demonstrate compliance with sector standards. So recommendations we made included setting those requirements for the minimum data recording and having service level agreements which include meeting minimum standards for KIM. The third theme was ensuring appropriate systems are in place. And again, there was 4 recommendations. So this area is about looking at systems, but also how they're used. So recommendations centred on reviewing existing databases for capability and capacity to record those key data requirements we've mentioned, ensuring staff are trained to use the systems, and scheduling sensitive information reviews. And the 4th theme was around mergers and structural changes. And again, 4 recommendations were made in this area. So our call for evidence highlighted that data was being lost or made inaccessible when stock is transferred, contracts with managing agents are ended, and service provision is brought back in-house or a merger happens. So recommendations on this one were about ensuring that there's sufficient planning and testing time, completing risk assessments and due diligence. So finally, the last theme was around repairs, and there was 3 recommendations on this topic. So our Spotlight, we described that in 2/3 of the cases we upheld about repairs, poor records of information management played a pivotal part in the maladministration. And it was also clear that poor records and systems were undermining the ability of complaint handlers to respond effectively to residents. And these problems were most acute in repair complaints. So our recommendations, they concerned areas such as conducting wastage analysis and providing appointment reminders.
Sarah. So there were lots of areas for landlords to be thinking about following the release of that original report in terms of those recommendations. So what does the Kim follow-up report aim to do?
We wanted to look at the impact of the Kim Spotlight recommendations on the sector, both to identify where landlords had used the recommendations to make improvements so that we can share learning more widely, but also to consider where they found implementing the recommendations challenging to see if we could provide additional support.
Brilliant, thanks Sophie. And in the original report, we looked at the expectations of organisations on Kim, for example, the National Housing Federation's Code of Governance, the Chartered Institute of Housing's Professional Standards, and also the HACT UK Housing Data Standard. So what additions have been made around Kim since that original report was published?
Yes, so there are a wide set of expectations for knowledge and information management from different sources that are placed on landlords. And many of those expectations remain unchanged. So like some of the ones you've just mentioned, the National Housing Federation's Code of Governance and the HACT UK Housing Data Standard. But there's also been some significant additions. The Regulator of Social Housing's new consumer standards came into effect on 1st of April 2024. And the standards make it clear that the regulator expects social landlords to have up-to-date information about the condition of each of their homes, as well as a clear understanding of the needs of individual residents. Landlords also need to collect and use data effectively across a range of areas, including repairs. And following on from the Better Social Housing Review, in October 2024, the National Housing Federation published their report, Making Every Contact Count. And this sets out how social landlords can use routine and planned interactions with residents as opportunities to gather information about the condition of the homes and the resident needs.
Brilliant, thanks Sarah. So how did you undertake your research for the follow-up report?
So we used a number of methods to gain landlord input. We contacted 137 landlords to understand what changes they have made or intend to make as a result of the Spotlight report and its recommendations. So this included the landlords who'd featured in the tables that were published in the Kim Spotlight report, also those who are already engaging with us through Kim-related webinars and workshops, and also then a selection of landlords who'd received a Kim-related order or recommendation since the publication of the report. We reviewed over 50 pieces of documentation, including written feedback and self-assessments against our report. And then we also held a workshop to invite verbal feedback, which was attended by representatives from 24 different landlords. And it was really great to hear firsthand about some of the initiatives underway as a result of the recommendations. And lastly, we also conducted an anonymous survey with complaint handling staff. And the aim of this was to hear at an operational level whether they had felt the impact of any changes, as well as to see any ongoing barriers.
Great, thank you. And what did you find from your call for evidence and research?
So in the survey, we asked whether complaint handlers were able to easily access the information they require to inform their decision making. We found that whilst around a quarter of respondents experienced issues accessing information easily, this compared favourably to our previous survey, where over half of those responding said that they experienced issues. Our follow-up questions focused on how this impacted their complaint handling, and those experienced issues suggested that this had a negative impact on their complaint handling timescales and on their ability to fully address the complaint. With regards to landlords, in our Spotlight report, we highlighted that senior leaders set the tone for their organisation and that a culture of clear expectations and standards led from the top and scrutinised by governance is essential. This message resonated with landlords, with many noting that the Kim report served as a catalyst for change for senior leaders who are now overseeing the creation and implementation of Kim strategies, ensuring that effective information governance mechanisms are in place. There was also noticeable improvement in landlords' approaches to using effective Kim with respect to repairs, especially in their approach to missed appointments. Not all of their recommendations have been straightforward for landlords to implement, however. While some described new or improved systems that have enhanced functionality and identification of trends, many said that they now face challenges in ensuring sensible and reliable data flow between the numerous systems. Benchmarking was also frequently discussed as a challenge during our workshop. So following our first report, a group of London councils set up a Kim benchmarking group to facilitate collaboration on Kim matters affecting their members. A podcast has been recorded with the council who set up the group, and this provides further detail of their approach and the benefits realised. And this podcast can be found in our Centre for Learning.
Thanks, Sophie. You just mentioned the Centre for Learning, which is all about sharing the insight and learning that comes from complaints. So kind of sticking to that theme, you also captured from landlords some of the good practice around what they were doing around implementing the recommendations. Would you like to share some of this with us?
Yes, definitely. So I mentioned in my previous response how there'd been a noticeable improvement with respect to KIM in the area of repairs. So one landlord who successfully undertook wastage analysis on missed appointments has used this insight to introduce a new appointment slot to avoid the school run times. And they told us that this was based on a review of missed appointment data. So this, combined with increased communication, has resulted in a reduction in no access from 14% to 8.7% over a comparable period. Another good practice example is around reviewing vulnerability related policies. So one landlord described how they'd been talking to other landlords operating in their area about how they're addressing and assessing vulnerability, sharing good practice between themselves. And another good example related to how the landlord's housing safeguarding leads worked with their partners to develop its self-neglect toolkit and new guidance to support staff working with people affected by cuckooing. It used the toolkit to work with frontline staff to develop new guidance on working with people with hoarding behaviours.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sophie. Some really good stuff and really good examples there. The follow-up report talks about low engagement with us about KIM. Could you tell us more about this and why you think there might have been low engagement?
Yeah, so overall the response was lower than anticipated in comparison with previous Spotlight evaluations. We don't know exactly why, but potentially as knowledge information management is a cross-cutting issue, perhaps it felt more time consuming to reply about actions in respect to it. Additionally, we recognise that some of the recommendations with respect to KIM take considerable time and resources to implement, so this may explain some of the reluctance to engage. On the back of this, we'd made the decision to hold the workshop, and that really helped us to hear firsthand from landlords about some of the initiatives that they were progressing as a result of the recommendations.
Okay, great. So where can those listening to this podcast access further resources on the topic?
So we've got a fantastic Centre for Learning which hosts a range of free resources, including training and events, a library of reports including spotlight reports, special investigations, quarterly insight reports and landlord complaint statistics. It also includes information on key topics including KIM. And you can also find a range of podcasts, including our previous podcast on KIM and our podcast aimed at getting senior leadership buy-in to KIM. And finally, it also includes the London KIM benchmarking group podcast that we mentioned in our earlier responses.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sophie. And actually, that brings us to the end of my questions for you, Sarah and Sophie. So thank you both very much for your time and for joining me today. It's been brilliant to hear from you both.
Thanks, Anthea.
Thank you.
And also, thanks, Sophie, and thanks, Sarah. And thanks for everybody for tuning in. And as Sophie mentioned, do keep an eye on our Centre for Learning for more resources on KIM and the other topics too. And we're always adding new materials there. So bye for now.